universe is a vast world filled with endless possibilities and fantastical adventures. From the transformation of ordinary people into superheroes to the cosmic battles between good and evil, countless heroic legends unfold once again. Today in the first episode of the Marvel series collection, let's step into Iron Man's world and witness how the genius billionaire Tony Stark, from a playboy, embarks on a passionate journey to become a superhero, opening the door to Marvel's legendary tales. Tony Stark was called a prodigy as a child. At age 4, he made a circuit board. At 6, he built his first engine, and by 17, he graduated from MIT, casually making a robot in the process. At 21, he officially took over Stark Industries, becoming a top weapons supplier. Everyone was eager to see what the missiles made by this top genius were like, and he didn't disappoint. He demonstrated his latest super weapon to the local troops, easily securing a $1 billion order. Then, under military escort, he headed to the airport. But he never expected that on the way, an accident occurred, and the train was attacked, with the soldiers protecting him. In a panic, he pulled out his phone to call for backup, but was blown up by his own missile. When he woke up, he found a magnet on his chest, and it's connected at both ends, to a battery. Turns out, a scientist saved him. The magnet on his chest was to pull out shrapnel near his heart. The scientist suddenly became very nervous. Then a group of terrorists barged in and handed Tony a blueprint, asking him to make the latest missile. Tony refused and was tortured. To save his life, Tony agreed to their demands but also made a plan. For a perfect escape. Plan. Iron Man Mark I was about to be born in this cave. First, he dismantled the core of a regular missile, extracted the elements, made a mold with clay, melted the elements, and poured them into the mold, resulting in a cooled energy core. Finally, he welded on the corresponding screws, and in an hour, the reactor was ready. So, the scientist realized Tony was building an Iron Man suit to escape. The two of them got right to work. In just a few days, they completed parts of the suit. The bearded man outside, who was watching, compared photos and praised Tony's excellent work. But once, while Tony was testing the suit, their bald leader discovered the patent. He immediately barged into the room and questioned what Tony was wearing on his leg. The scientist quickly explained that those were missile parts. The cautious bald leader picked up the papers on the table. He looked at the blueprints but couldn't understand anything. Understand. He grabbed the scientist and threatened Tony. They had one day to make a missile. To save their lives, Tony promised to finish on time. So, the two of them worked through the night to build the suit. After a whole night of forging, the last part was finally done. Tony put on the suit and began the first test while outside the monitor. The bald leader also noticed the same thing. He sent out his men to check, but as soon as the door opened, two of his men, the bald leader immediately sent out more enemies. He grabbed the gun and rushed out. At the cave entrance, he paused, but it gave the Mark I suit time to activate. This welded armor was Iron Man's first prototype. The famous Mark I. He struck hard, but his arm got stuck in the wall. A mustached man took advantage, and a bald guy fired an explosive shot. Tony shot back. Seeing the dead scientist, Tony was furious. He controlled Mark I, and as he stepped out, enemy fire rained down. Tony took out the enemies and burned their weapons. Amidst a big explosion, he activated the flight switch. In seconds, Tony, in the Mark armor, shot out of the flames. The precise 0.1 mm curvature of the lines makes the Mark II look even more stylish. Once everything is ready, Iron Man makes a grand entrance. Tony flies straight towards the moon. When he reaches an altitude of over 50,000 feet, the armor's shell starts to freeze rapidly. The system suddenly malfunctions and begins to short-circuit, causing the armor to completely fail. Luckily, in this critical moment, he activates the de-icing mechanism, and as the ice melts away, the system recovers just in time. This is the happiest Tony has ever been. When he returns to the lab and is adjusting the armor's arm, he sees the atrocities of terrorists on TV, which have led to countless refugees suffering. Tony decides to equip the Mark II to teach them a lesson. Tony, equipped with the Iron Man suit, arrives at the brutal battlefield. Facing terrorists who harm innocent civilians, Tony shows no mercy. He charges his palm and takes out the surrounding thugs in seconds. But when he turns around, the thugs used hostages to threaten him, so Tony had to put his hands down. But inside his helmet, he had already locked onto all dangerous targets. The bearded man tried to call for backup but was pulled out by Tony from the wall. However, he hadn't flown far before. He was hit by a shell. It turned out to be an enemy tank hiding in the shadows, breathing down Tony's neck. Tony dodged to the side. He returned the favor with an armor-piercing shell. Countless bullets rained down on him, but they couldn't even scratch his armor's paint. He flew high into the sky, locked onto 3 shells, and with a clap, Tony detonated them. But on the way, he encountered a bigger crisis. While passing through military territory, he was detected by radar. 2 fighter jets locked onto him and, following orders, began to attack. Tony didn't want to harm innocents, so he suddenly vanished from their sight with an emergency maneuver. Back at the lab, he started repairing the damage to the parts. Meanwhile, the main villain, Arthur, appeared, after seeing the wreckage of Mark I. Mark I's combat power increased tenfold, and unexpectedly, Pepper Potts led S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to capture Arthur. Arthur sensed something was wrong and quickly donned the Mark I armor. By the time everyone arrived, it was too late. Arthur controlled the armor and took out all the agents in seconds. Finally, he cornered Pepper, and just as she was about to meet her end, a dashing figure appeared. Arthur stood up. He lifted the small car high, ready to fight Tony. Energy gathered in his chest. A blast of energy killed Arthur just as Tony was about to set down the car. It was very tense. The nervous female driver suddenly slammed on the brakes. Tony was just run over by the car. Arthur smashed a motorcycle into his face. Perhaps due to the significant size difference, Tony was pinned to the ground and beaten severely by Arthur, then grabbed by him. But didn't expect Mark I. Performance caught up later. Unexpectedly, it increased tenfold. Just like that, they went full throttle, flying like the moon in the sky. Tony flew faster and faster, while Arthur behind was unaware he was already caught in Tony's trap because Tony knew. Mark I had a flaw. When it reached a certain height, it would freeze, and the system would short-circuit, eventually stopping completely. At this point, Tony's energy was nearly depleted. He glided back to the ground, but before he could steady himself, Arthur, who wasn't dead, ambushed Tony, almost crushing him into a metal pancake. Luckily, he reacted quickly, using a lot of decoys to break free and evacuate. Then he instructed Pepper to activate the reactors. All circuits. He decided to go down with Arthur. Together. At the moment Pepper pressed the button, countless electric grids gathered, resounding across the sky. Tony was blasted to one side, while Arthur was attracted by the resistance and exploded on the spot. Tony luckily survived, and later at the press conference, Tony, Hulk saved the world and found himself on the battlefield. The Marvel Universe story is just starting.